Okay, so let's see. We have I'm live with any luck. I have audio, I have myself, I have the water. Hello, nice to see the first one here. Just doing my checks. Water, notepad, microphone on, and let's just turn that down a little bit. Hopefully that's still picking me up okay. So I'll just change pages here. This is the 30th one of these, and anyone who's here who hasn't been here before, feel free to subscribe. If you find this interesting or helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And so I'm just keeping an eye on my mic. My mic keeps telling me that it's too loud. Not the mic to the computer, but the mic I record into, which is unusual. Let's turn that down. Hopefully that's okay. So this will work like all of these work. I'll spend the first 30 minutes or so having any catch up, responding to any questions anyone might have, and then transitioning into getting any ideas from people. Getting ideas from people. And then after getting ideas, obviously at about 10:30, so that's 10:30 to me here. All my wires seem slightly out of place. They're getting under my feet. So about 10:30 UK time, I will start whatever kind of meditation gets created with the ideas I've written down. So let me just start my page off though, so that I remember. Sleep. So those of you who subscribe to the podcast, you'll already know what Wednesday's sleep meditation is. It's the walking the dog meditation, the one with the dog and the sandcastle. For those of you who've forgotten what one that is. So I spent most of the day editing that one. Let's just move this. My scene seems off, seems funny. So that's the one I've spent all day editing. So on Wednesday, for my main weekly video this week, that'll be the video. Obviously, instead of doing a normal trying to think, sound effects, that's the one, that's the words I'm looking for. Instead of doing a normal sound effects version on Saturday, I did the 90-minute hypnotherapy session video instead. It obviously hasn't got very many views, and so YouTube keeps giving me notifications saying your audience doesn't like this video. People aren't clicking on this video when we show it to them, all the usual stuff that YouTube says if I try anything other than a traditional sleep meditation. So it's currently kind of my lowest ranking video out of the last 10 videos. But that's just because, that's the last 10 non-live videos. That's what YouTube lists it out of. So unfortunately, I thought it'd be something different and something that people would find interesting and potentially helpful. And I think the people who've watched it have liked it, but the people clicking through to watch it in the first place is very low numbers. I think it's got a click through rate of about 2% or something, whereas my sleep meditations have a click through rate of about 6%. I've wanted to do that kind of thing for quite a few years. I kind of thought about doing it. I thought if I ever buy a VR, I've had a VR headset, PlayStation VR headset for quite some time. Um, I'm trying to think. Abby got it for me for my birthday. I think not last year, but the year before. So a couple of years I've had virtual reality headsets. Before that, I've always been fascinated by virtual reality and always thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a virtual reality therapy session where you put on a virtual reality headset and you see me sat opposite you, um, and it sounds like I'm sat opposite you, and you kind of do that session with me, where obviously if you open your eyes while you got the virtual reality headset on, you would see me sat opposite you, and you can sort of look around or whatever. Um, I don't have a virtual reality camera, unfortunately, one that records in like 360. So I can't do that. But I had thought about the idea of doing kind of an audio version. I've done similar things before, just normally sat down to, in fact, many of my things that I do are that kind of thing of um, sitting down. I'm trying to think what it is. One of my tracks, I think, starts with me saying that I've made, this is especially for you. And I then kind of do a very similar process on that track, trying to make it seem personal and seem like it's a session for you, the person in front of me. So I've done similar-ish things before, but not with a microphone that's designed to specifically pinpoint my location in space. So that's the advantage this time, that it's supposed to make it feel more um, real, so to speak, because of the fact that it's done with a microphone that creates a binaural um, audio recording. So what that is that instead of it just being stereo, where something is in the left ear or the right ear, the sound comes from a location in space, and that location in space is recorded onto, or the information about the location in space is recorded onto the track itself, so that if you listen to it with headphones, especially, then the audio information is translated into spatial information, which means that it then sounds like I'm at a specific location in space, so that you can have that sense like we're in a room together. And obviously, like with any of this, the more realistic you can make it. For example, I know from personal experience that if I listen to, say, a self hypnosis track on a stereo, like just a normal, the sort of bulky old, I've still got one, but the old school kind of stereos that you put a CD in or whatever. If you listen to a track on something like that that's got one speaker or two speakers, but it's coming from one small location, that's nowhere near as absorbing, and it doesn't make you kind of go so deeply into an experience as if you listen to exactly the same thing but through headphones. And then that doesn't make you go as deeply into the experience as something that has more depth to it than just stereo sound. And then that doesn't make you go deeper into the experience as something that has ideally some sound effects that match what's going on. So if I was saying about the sound of the traffic outside, if you're wearing headphones and I had actually recorded some traffic sound, for example, or I knew that traffic sound was picked up on the microphone or something, that then becomes even more impactful, because it makes it feel more like you're really there. And that's why I've spoken before about when I make people personalized self hypnosis tracks, I will respond to things that I think they're going to be doing during the track. And I'll say things like it's okay to laugh a little or something like that. And then the person will have been laughing slightly and they'll think, how on earth does he know that? I'm sure I'm listening to a track. And they'll have that sense like I must be in the room with them because I'm responding as if I'm really in the room with them. yeah, I literally behaved exactly as I would doing what I was saying I was doing. So when I lifted up your arm, I didn't just sit there and say it. I leant forward and I lifted up your arm. I actually genuinely did. I'm going to turn sideways onto the camera here so I can lean forward. I genuinely went, okay, in a moment, I'm going to lift up that left arm, no, that right arm, I think it was. I'm going to lift up that right arm and slowly, and I'm not going to tell you to put it down any faster than you go deeper into the experience or whatever it was I said. And then I leant forward and very carefully and slowly lifted up the arm and moved my voice up slightly as I was doing that because I'm watching my hand as I'm lifting up your arm. And then I tapped where the arm would be just to help it to stay stuck in the air for a bit. And then once I felt that it was stuck in the air, I then sat back in the chair so that you would hopefully notice that I've sat back in the chair. Yeah. And obviously, the other thing I did was I barely edited it. So I'm trying to think what I did edit. The entire session, unedited, I think was 120, 1 hour, 28 minutes long. And I think I only knocked about 30 seconds off of the full length through editing. And a part of that obviously was the beginning bit um, and the very end bit where I turn the microphone on and off. And so I wanted to make sure that things like chair squeaks and things like that were included because the whole point is that you've got to feel like you're in a room with me, not feel like, oh, I've edited everything out so that it doesn't, it sort of goes silent or something. The idea is that you should be able to hear the background sounds of the room. You should be able to hear if someone's stomping upstairs. You should be able to hear that on the recording, just like you would in a real session. So that was sort of the idea, to make it feel like you're actually there, not feel like it's just a studio recording or something. And so, yeah, so there was a lot that was done in that session. I didn't know, I couldn't see how long the session was because my microphone's over there, but the screen on it is at the back because the idea is normally you're recording things and you need the screen in front of you, but kind of with the microphone, so the front bit is at the front. So the screen was at the back, which meant that I couldn't see how long the session was. I was just doing a session like I would potentially do a session if I wasn't given any content directly. And I naturally, when I do sessions, have this natural feeling that 90 minutes is about the right length for a session. And it came out at, I think, 128 minutes and 31 seconds or something stupid. So it was pretty much bang on kind of that time. I'm just trying to see what the actual, it might have been 129 minutes and 30 seconds or something. Whatever it was, I knocked about 30 seconds off by cropping the beginning and the end. And I made a bit of a crop. I'm trying to think where. Don't know. I think I might have coughed at one point that I cropped out. Something like that. I did something like that I just cropped that little bit. But yeah, it was pretty much 90 minutes bang on without any. It was what it would be if I was doing a real session, that I would naturally fall into that kind of rhythm of 90 minutes. Now it's time to kind of, you'd have 2 hours or so, or I'd block 2 hours out, tell people that the session's about 90 minutes, with the idea that we would be chatting briefly between 90 minutes and, for 15 minutes ish, while just to make sure they're okay to go home. And then they would go home, and then I'd have 15 minutes before the next person comes in for a session. So that's normally kind of how I do it, that I expect whatever therapeutic stuff to go on to be about 90 minutes, and then about 15 minutes of kind of making sure the person's ready to go home. And obviously that bit isn't on there. I leave it so that you can if you want, you won't get so much therapeutic benefit if you use it for sleep. But if you wanted to use it for sleep, there's no reason why someone couldn't listen to it and just use it to drift off with having a therapy session before bed kind of thing. I leave it open ended at the end with the idea that you can either drift off asleep or wake up in your own time, kind of right now, if you really wanted to. So, yeah, so there was no timers or anything like that. It was just purely, um, you know, turn on the microphone, invite the person into the room, have them sit down and crack on. Um, I technically did. The microphone was already, so the microphone was on a tripod. I sat down opposite the microphone, set the microphone up on a tripod so that it's a kind of, so the microphone part was roughly where I felt the ears of a client about the same height as me would be. Um, and then once I turned the microphone on, I stood up, uh, went to the door. This is what I cut. Stood up, went to the door, and the door was open. And so I then uh, kind of said something like "come in" or something. I can't remember how I started it, but I said to come in, and then closed the door, and then I walked obviously from the door back to the seat and sat back down in the seat while talking as if it was the client who was potentially walking in and sitting down in the seat. Um, so yeah, so that was me doing that. I was going to include knocking on the door as well, um, but then I thought someone's bound to moan that even though the knocking is right at the very beginning, before you've even closed your eyes or anything properly, someone's bound to complain about that. Hello, glad to see you here. Um, so yeah, so I just did it all myself in one take, and that was it. That was that track. And I did think that it would be a bit more popular. I didn't think it would be popular, but I thought it'd be probably on my kind of, out of my 10 most recent videos, I thought it might hit like the 5 out of 10 or something, but it didn't. Because I thought people would like it for sleep, even if they didn't want to use it for therapy, so to speak, or out of just curiosity. I thought people might be curious what it would be like to have an experience of having a therapy session, a sort of hypnotherapy session. And so I thought, even out of curiosity, that given that there's 62,000 or whatever people subscribe to the channel, that out of 62,000 people, perhaps a handful of them would just have a curiosity of, oh, I wonder what it would be like to have a therapy session with Dan. Let's put some headphones on and give this a go. You can use it before bed, before going to sleep, but if you fall asleep to it, you won't get any therapeutic benefit from, apart from relaxation, from the point of being asleep. So obviously, with any therapy, it's a bit like the all of my sleep meditations. That if you fall asleep to the sleep meditation, you don't get the therapeutic benefits from the point that you've fallen asleep because you've shut off from it. But you've got kind of part of the, you've got one benefit, which is that you're asleep. So that's why I always recommend that if you want help with anxiety and stress and worry and things like that, listen to the sleep meditations during the day at a time when you're not tired, so that it's just like any other self hypnosis session or hypnosis sort of therapy session. If you actually want to kind of fall asleep to it, then listen to it at bedtime, but be aware that obviously once you shut off from it because you've fallen asleep, then it won't, you're not engaging with it, so you won't get the therapeutic benefits of whatever happens after you've fallen asleep. Whereas generally in hypnotherapy, it's rare for people to fall asleep during a session. because they're supposed to be engaging with the session. And if you're engaging with something, you don't normally just fall asleep. You don't normally follow along thinking, okay, I'm going to mentally rehearse this now, and then while you're mentally rehearsing, fall asleep. Normally you're engaging with it, and so you're awake and you are very alert. Yeah, so I always say that the sleep meditations are kind of win-win. If you don't fall asleep and it's potentially because of stress or worry or anxiety, then as long as you're engaged with the process, you're going to be getting the therapeutic benefit in relation to stress, worry, and anxiety. But if you do fall asleep, then it's helped you to fall asleep, which is what you want. Um, there isn't really tips for focusing better, other than, or not that I have, other than people are good at focusing on you can obviously practice. So, for example, if someone's meditating, it's very difficult to hold your attention, say on one sound or something. It's very difficult to hold your attention on one sound or to hold your attention on your breathing. So, it's literally just practice that helps you to achieve that. In relation to being hypnotized, it's not so much that you can't be hypnotized. Uh, you can't get hypnotized if you can't focus. It's more a case of, um, if you're not focused, then you're not deeply hypnotized. So if I tried to hypnotize, as I've spoken before, if I tried to hypnotize someone with a relaxation induction, but they're someone who's hyper and they're someone who doesn't focus their attention, then that's not going to work for them. But if I talk about things that are hyper and I'm kind of hyper with them and I'm bouncing them all over the place and keeping their attention moving around, then you can have their attention being focused and you can hold their attention because you're doing it in the way that's natural for them. So for pretty much everyone, we all have things that hold our attention or that we can focus on. We all have activities we enjoy, or um, things that we do that, just like, you can get someone who's got ADHD, but they can play a computer game for hours and hours and hours. So clearly, if they're playing a computer game for hours and hours and hours, then they can focus their attention. You might just have to do that kind of thing as the induction, like having them think that they're playing a computer game. Um, uh, I've done lots and lots of similar-ish videos to the sort of the one that I did at the weekend. Yep, computer games are rewarding, but then that's what you would do. So, say somebody said that, I don't know, their favorite computer game was Call of Duty, and that keeps them focused. Um, then yeah, and they can engage in Call of Duty for hours and hours and hours. Then use Call of Duty as your induction. Do that as the induction, and have them sort of focused on being in Call of Duty or something, and focused on playing Call of Duty, but they're doing it in their mind, and you're making it all really vivid for them and making it really engaging for them. And then that's kind of the best way to help them. So when I've done meditation with people, I have often, like when I've taught meditation classes and things, I will often sort of point out that it's better not to worry about the whole relaxation thing. If you want to engage everyone, do it in the way that's right for every individual. Not everyone can sit there with their legs crossed, focusing on a word or focusing on breathing or something. So anyway, throw out some ideas and I'll get myself a list. Got 6 minutes. And then this can be whatever the story is going to be created with. drink in front of me for now. A river. An ocean. Yes, the kids ones were really difficult to do, like Sid and Felicity. I wouldn't do that for an adult one and I definitely wouldn't do it for a live one like this. It's really difficult to that they were written and not spoken. A boat, giraffe. I find it really, really hard to use names. Camille the camel. I've got Camille the camel over there somewhere. I think writing the kids' stories is something that I was just so angry for nearly the entire time of writing because of things like having to do it in a certain way. Uh, and the stress of that. And that's why I never finished writing book 3 or the charity book. I was trying to write a charity version, but I never finished writing that either. More fireflies. They seem to crop up in nearly every story now. All I think of when I see the word basset is sweets. Right, we've got one more minute if there's any more ideas. Yep, there was a golden key in the one that goes live on Wednesday. The golden key that's in the box that you open the door with after going through the maze. Right. Let's get comfortable. Turn my phone over so it doesn't go off. Well, that's the idea. It doesn't seem to work. So, hopefully I can read my handwriting. That's always my biggest challenge, given that I can't stop, read, and then edit out the pausing because I'm doing it live. So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close. And with your eyes closed, you can begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, so I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And while I tell this sleep meditation in the background, you can allow yourself to comfortably drift asleep. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice or to the spaces between my words. But as you drift asleep, you can have a sense of two twins. You can have a sense of two twins on a boat. And they're out on their first trip alone together. These two twins, they've just turned 18. And for their 18th birthday, they're going out across a piece of ocean to an island. They're going to camp on that island and spend some time proving how independent they are. And so, as they travel on that boat, they can hear the wind in the sail, the sound of the waves against the sides of the boat. They can notice what the sky looks like, feeling the breeze against their faces. And they arrive at the island, carefully moor up the boat at a jetty. And they take their belongings off that boat, walk down the jetty onto the island. It's quite a large island, but there's no one here. And off on the horizon, they can see the shoreline, the mainland. And as the sun passes across the sky, And the afternoon sets in, gets later and later. So they find a space a little way from the shore, just on the tree line, to set up camp. And they find that almost everything they do is in sync with each other. They don't know whether they believe in telepathy or not, but they sometimes feel like they probably have some kind of telepathic connection. When one does one thing, the other knows what to do at the same time. And they frequently think they know what each other's thinking. And so they set up a reasonably large tent, big enough for the two of them to sleep comfortably in that tent, with plenty of space to walk around in the tent. They set up that large tent, set up the beds in that large tent. They make that tent so cozy, so comfortable. And they can hear the breeze blowing, making the sides of the tent gently wave and move. They can smell the fresh sea air blowing in through the entrance of the tent. And the first thing they do once the tent's all put up and their beds are made is they lie down on their beds and instantly start to feel like just relaxing for a moment, taking in the beginning of this experience. That kind of relaxation you feel after you've done a task, or you've just made a bed and you just want to lie down for a moment with that sense of achievement, that sense that you deserve this. So they just relax there for a bit, not talking to each other, but just listening to the sounds outside the tent. The sound of the sea lapping on the shore, the sounds of birds among the trees behind them, and the sound of the wind. And then as that sun gets lower in the sky and begins to set, so they decide to go out onto the beach, just a short few steps from the entrance to the tent. Set up a campfire, place some comfortable chairs near that campfire, and cook themselves some food and have a drink with the dancing light of the campfire and the sight of the setting sun. And that crackling sound of the campfire. And as they cook and eat their food, so they enjoy the smells of that food. They laugh and joke, and enjoy this first night. And then notice how the sound of the sea lapping on the shore changes slightly as night falls. How the sound almost sounds broader with a slight echo to it. And they walk barefoot down to the water's edge, through that soft sand, through the dry, soft sand as they approach the water, then noticing that sand become firmer and cooler as it becomes damper the closer to the water they get. Then having those waves gently lap on the shore, roll in, tickle their feet, and then roll back out again, pulling that fine sand out over their feet, through their toes. And they stand on the water's edge, side by side, gazing out towards where the horizon would be. And they can't see the horizon, because the horizon is as dark as the sky. But they can have a sense for where it is, because they can see where the stars end. And out here on a deserted island, the quilt of starlight above them is twinkling so bright they can see colours in the sky. They can see more stars than they've ever seen. And they feel a sense of scale, gazing up, like that sky must be so large. They walk back up the beach a little bit, lie down on that soft sand, lying side by side, just staring up at the sky, hearing those waves rolling in further down the beach, and just seeing those stars arching overhead, noticing the occasional shooting star whiz and fizz across the sky, sometimes green, sometimes red, sometimes blue, sometimes the most pure white. And they find themselves naturally falling into conversations of a philosophical nature, wondering whether there's any other life out there, wondering if other life out there is doing similar to them here, gazing up at the night sky, wondering whether any other life is out there. They wonder whether there's any alien spaceships flying around out there. They wonder whether in the future mankind will encounter aliens, what that would be like, how that would change things for humanity. They wonder whether mankind has ever met aliens in the past, and what they would have thought of those aliens. They discussed how in the past mankind probably would have thought they were gods coming down from the heavens, landing in balls of fire, and then leaving in these roaring balls of fire. And they found that there was something about lying on a beach, feeling calm, relaxed, gazing up at how large the universe is, arched overhead, that seems to encourage a sense of wonder and conversations of wonder. And that those conversations and that sense of wonder can give a sense of perspective and really show how small you are in the universe. And their conversation turns to, what if there is no other life out there? And the importance that would place on humanity to preserve the life that's here, to make sure to look after the life that's here, to protect the planet, if that's all there is. And if it isn't all there is, then a focus on going and meeting more life would be an incredible thing for the future. And after a deeper conversation than they've had in years, they head back to the tent and they sit just outside the tent for a while as that fire burns down to embers. And as the fire burns down, so it starts crackling faster, a bit like cereal in the morning. And then that subtle glow and that warmth begins to fade, and their feet are fully dry now. So they rub off the sand, head into the tent. They settle down in their beds. They continue their conversations, snuggled up comfortably in their beds, with torchlight glowing around them. That sound of the ocean outside. Feeling so calm and so relaxed, and they drift and float comfortably asleep. And the next morning, they awaken early to the rising sun, the sounds of birds around them. They feel so alert and full of energy. They leave the tent. They gaze out over the daytime view, noticing the difference again in the sound of that sea. And their plan is to explore the island. They're going to walk to the river that'll take them inland to the center of the island. And they'll hike to the center of that island during the day. And in case they need it, they've got themselves some hammocks they can hang in the trees that come with small tent coverings that almost create a tent for one, a bit like a cocoon. And so they set off towards the river, walk along the edge of that river, heading in towards the center of the island. And they've got their backpacks with them. And the backpacks, as they walk, feel almost like having a turtle's shell on your back. Feels like at any moment, if they had to trudge uphill, they might fall backwards and be flailing around on their backs. But they feel it's better to be prepared. And they carry on their conversations as they walk along the edge of that river. And they can hear the river lapping gently against the sides of that riverbank. And around the river, the forest gets denser and denser the more inland they go. And the easiest route to take is to skirt that forest and keep following the river. And this river is a tidal river. The seawater flows in, and fresh water flows out. And as the sea rises and falls through the day, so the river rises and falls. And a wave at the front of that pushes down the river. And after some time, they find their way to the source of the river. To a natural spring. And it seems very small and unassuming. And yet this small looking spring pushes out enough water to push back the sea, to flow that fresh water down towards the ocean. And they head up, away from the edge of the river, up slightly into the forest. They stop for something to eat. And then one of them gets out a book, and in that book is a folded map. And they look on that map and they see that they're almost at the location of something they really wanted to try and find. They'd heard that there was a chest buried here. They didn't know what was in the chest. But growing up, their dad had kept on talking about a chest on this island. And from his stories, they'd worked out where they thought it might be. They didn't know if he was telling the truth or just telling bedtime stories, but they enjoyed the idea of one day trying to find out and see what this treasure is if it exists. And so, after having something to eat, they find that location they've marked on the map. They try and see if there's any giveaway signs, anything that might let them know where that chest might be. And they look around them and they notice that generally the trees are very dense, but there's one area where they can just see slightly more light seeming to shine through the trees above. And so they wonder if maybe there's a bit more of a clearing in that area. They think it's a long shot, but they decide that they'll go and check out that area. So they cut through the forest. And as they do, they can hear the rustling leaves overhead as the wind blows a breeze. They can see the dancing shards of light as the sun manages to occasionally burst through the moving leaves. And they reach that clearing. And they get a little camping shovel out of one of the bags. They scrape the topsoil off, they scrape some of the leaves off, some of those twigs off. And they take a look down at the clearing to see if there's any height difference, if there's anything that might give away that something's under the ground. And they notice that some of what's growing on the ground isn't quite as thick in one area. And they wonder whether maybe that's because there's something quite shallow under that area. So things can't dig their roots down quite the same there. There isn't quite so much moisture there. So they go to that space. They dig down carefully, removing that soil, until they hear a knock. They realize they've reached something. And excitedly, they carefully nudge down with the spades, working out the dimensions, clearing the soil from above that, clearing the soil from around the sides of it slightly. And then together they reach in, lift that out, and place it down next to the hole. And they see that that chest is locked. They don't know how they're going to get into it. They've not got a key. And they've not got any other clues. They decide that what's best would be to take that chest back to the camp, where they could work on it some more. Maybe they could pick the lock. So they start carrying that chest back, but decide after a while that it's a bit too heavy. So they stop and decide to see if they can pick the lock here. And they start trying to pick that lock, carefully listening, to the lock while moving the workings inside the lock up and down until they hear a slight click, and then moving to the next bit inside that lock until they hear a slight click again, and then holding that bit in place and moving to the next bit. And then that lock pops open and they remove the lock. And with a slight squeak, they open that lid and they look inside the chest. And inside the chest, they can see an old book. And next to the old book is a small little box. And then what looks like a letter or something inside an envelope. And then next to that, on both sides, are some bars of gold. And they realise that those bars of gold must be what was making this so heavy. And they pick up those bars and they handle them. Feel how smooth those bars of gold are. They put them back down into the chest. They pick up the small little box and they open it, and inside they see a golden key. And that golden key is on a chain. And so one of the twins puts that golden key over their neck and just hangs that over their neck. And then the other one looks in the envelope. And when they try and read what's written on the paper, they find that it seems to just be symbols. It doesn't seem to make sense. And they turn it over and they both take a look. And the way it's written looks like it's meaningful. It's just that they don't understand the meaning. And then they take out that old book. They can notice how all the pages seem to be almost like they were individually just torn bits of paper, turned into a really old book, looking hundreds of years old. They can't really understand much of the writing in this book either. But they try and look through. They can see there are some illustrations in this book. And they decide that they want to take the book, want to take the key, and want to take the letter with them. They don't feel they need the gold. They want the puzzle. They want to solve this puzzle. So they return that chest, they cover it over. And now, not carrying quite so much, they set off back to their camp. And back at the tent, they look through that book, they look at the letter, and they try and compare the two and see if they can work out any kinds of patterns. And they happen to have mobile phones with them. And so they try and look up some of the different symbols, see if they can find any clue as to what any of this might mean. And they start to find some references to certain symbols. And so, in a separate notebook, they start writing down what those symbols mean. And they notice that these symbols mean a different language. So they keep having to use a translator to work out what this language means as they translate a few words at a time. And not only is it a different language, but it's an old version of that different language. And they realize that this book, as they get more and more of the words, seems to be almost like a book of spells, a book of healing. It describes itself as a book that you can heal people by reading to them, by having them enter some kind of a trance state, and then reading these spells to them. And if they follow along to these spells, then healing can occur. And that you can say these spells to yourself, allowing that healing to occur for yourself. And they decide that they're going to need plenty of time to work out and decipher the entire book. And the letter, they discover, is about the book. And it tells them that there's even more for them to find. That this was where they'd hidden the last of their treasure. And it talks about how this was the last stand of some witches. That witches became hunted down. That instead of being appreciated for the healing work that they did, people became scared of them. So they turned the last of their money into gold, took it out to this island, placed their book of spells in this location. And there's a building on the mainland, and the key is for that building. And this is where they hid their witch's past and decided to put all that behind them and just fit in. But people were too scared to be ready to accept help from those who could heal. And the twins talked about how it would be a bit like people with greater knowledge, like aliens, landing and trying to share that knowledge. And if the knowledge is too advanced for them, or seems too alien for them, then some people that can scare them. It can make them feel anxious and worried, perhaps even uncertain. And it's human nature to identify risks. And some people can get stuck on a spiral of identifying the risks without stepping off that spiral to take an objective look from a place of calm and peace. And that seems to be what happened here hundreds of years ago. And so the twins settled down for another night. knowing they're heading back to the mainland in the morning. They drift and float comfortably and relax to sleep. And the next day, they pack everything away onto their boat. They set back off towards the mainland. And as they travel back to the mainland, they talk about how this was a great trip to make on turning 18. It was an exciting trip to make. And it's a trip that's going to continue to teach them something new with this book. A trip that's going to allow them hopefully to find the building that key opens. And so they head back to the mainland, head home, drop everything off at home, say hello to their parents, freshen up. And then they carry on deciphering that book and the letter. And after deciphering many of the spells in that book, they realize that there's an address. And it's not an address that makes much sense now, but they know from the history of the area that it made sense once in the past. And so they look up where that address would have been. And later that day, they travel off to that address. They jump on their bikes. They cycle some distance, turning into some woodland, cycling through the woodland, passing through a meadow, heading out into a more rural area, cycling down what's barely a road. They pass a field with the most beautiful white horse. They pass a field of sheep. They keep cycling where there's barely any houses. And they'd planned on trying to get back before the sun set, but now were aware that they probably won't. They let their parents know that they are okay, but they're going to be home a bit later. And they turn down a dirt track, down into what looked like a deserted, perhaps a farm. They didn't know exactly what was going to be down this dirt track. They could notice the low fog as the evening set in. It was hanging over the fields around them, occasionally crossing that dirt track as it escaped from the fields. The way it parted as their bikes went through that fog. They could see fireflies among the trees. And the way their backsides glowed even more in the white fog, creating glowing patches of fog. And apart from the sounds of their bikes, there was just silence. there'd be the occasional sounds of crickets. But then as they approached, they would go silent as well. And sometimes there'd be the sound of movement in the sky, perhaps a bird flying out of a tree, maybe some bats flying overhead. And eventually they arrived at a rundown property. Didn't look like anyone had lived here for years. The roof on one side of the property had caved in. The walls had half caved in on that side of the property. The other side of the property was still standing and looked structurally okay. And around this property was a low, dense fog. And the girls got their mobile phones out and the torches on their phones, walked into this property and started exploring in the property. And they found a door against a wall. And they tried the key in that door. And as they put that key in the door and they twisted that key, so it sounded like there was a click and a clunk, and then a winding sound, almost like clockwork. And then the door opened. They could see some steps going down. As they followed those steps down deep under this property, they walked down those steps. They found themselves in an underground chamber, and were surprised at the size of this chamber. And they started exploring. They could see different belongings. And they imagined these belongings probably belonged to these witches. And they found some records, really old newspaper articles that were more like just sheets of paper, not like a newspaper that they're used to. And from everything they've deciphered and what they learned of the language, they realized that some of what was written was diary entries of these witches. And then there were these newspaper clippings, these kind of newspaper pages that seemed to be in Old English about these witches, showing that people of the time were fearful of them, and they'd kept these different pages, these different articles. And they found many other items that showed that these witches were just like anyone else. They obviously just knew how to help heal people. They knew how to communicate in a way that stimulated healing in others. And then, as one of them were exploring, they touched a brick that looked like it was sticking out slightly. They just had that instinctive feeling of wanting to push that brick into place. But when they did, the wall slid open, revealing a secret passage. And they looked at each other and decided to explore that secret passage. And it was a narrower passage, but perfectly tall enough for them to walk through. Just like walking along a normal corridor. Just like walking along, just like walking along a normal corridor. And at the end of the corridor, they noticed that it opened out into a room of mirrors, and their lights bounced off all those mirrors. They could see themselves in those mirrors. And there was a seat right in the middle of them. And one of them sat down on that seat. And they could see on a silver plaque on the ground a sign saying to look inside yourself, to see yourself. So they sat there and they looked at themselves, and they could see, as they relaxed their vision, themselves in the mirrors at the side. They could see themselves in the mirror in front. They had a sense of themselves in the mirror overhead. And then the other one came and sat down, and both twins perched on that chair. And they wondered what this room was all about. And they shone their light around the mirrors. But to properly see themselves, they had to aim the light diagonally down so that it would bounce around the mirrors and just begin to illuminate the room rather than bounce strongly straight back at them. And as they gazed into those mirrors, both sat there together. One of them got that book out and started looking through the spells, and then picked a spell and said, "I think we should read this one while we're here, about good fortune for the future, as we've just turned 18. And so the other twin got the translated version in the notepad, flicked to that page, and together they started reading that spell out loud. And while they read, so they noticed the way that sound seemed to reverberate around this room, almost like the spell was bouncing off the mirrors back at them. And as they read, and they fell into a comfortable rhythm of reading, so the strangest thing happened. The light from their phones almost seemed to turn into colours of the rainbow reflecting around those mirrors. There was a rainbow of coloured light reverberating in this room. And they continued comfortably to read And that light continued to pulse and reverberate stronger and stronger, until all of a sudden it was as if the room didn't exist. The light reverberated and pulsed stronger and stronger and stronger, until it all became white light again, getting brighter and brighter. And then it turned into the blue sky of day, the most beautiful country garden, trees around the outside of the garden, the sounds of birds, the warmth of the sun on their face. And as they looked around themselves, they noticed it was as if they were sat on a bench in this country garden. They could see a vegetable patch off at the back of this garden. They could see butterflies and other insects going about their business. They could see birds, hearing those birds. They could see the most beautiful roses just swaying in the breeze. And some of those roses were so close they could touch those waxy petals. And they looked around themselves in astonishment, curious at what had happened. They were only 2/3 of the way through the spell, and now they seemed to be here. And they can see an oak tree standing tall at the end of the garden that looks like it's been there for an age. So they walk together down this garden, still wondering how they got here and where here is. They reach that oak tree, ran their hands around the bark, noticing how real everything in this garden feels, wondering how they can both be having this experience. And they could see out the back of the garden a meadow. And in that meadow, they see someone walking a basset hound. They gaze up and see a bird of prey on an updraft of warm air, just circling gently high above that meadow. They see some squirrels in the trees, climbing, weaving their way around the trunk of the trees. And they notice they can't hear any cars or any other people. It seems to be a very natural environment. And they look back towards where they've just walked. They see the back side of a beautiful cottage, with the back door open onto this country garden. But as they look back, so they notice the occasional flicker and movement. And they carry on reading that script. They carry on reading that spell. And as they read, so the experience continues to unfold around them, this feeling of comfort. Both thinking this is the future we want, to live somewhere beautiful, somewhere natural, somewhere away from the hustle and bustle of busy cities. And they realize that this is a representation of a possible future of theirs. They catch a glimpse of themselves in a pond in the garden as they gaze down and see a frog jumping into that pond. They notice the gnomes fishing in that pond. And as they see themselves, at first they wonder if they saw what they thought they saw. And so they look closer as that water becomes stiller. And they realize that they definitely both look older, and that this is a representation of their future. And they continue reading that spell. And as they reach the completion of that spell, they sit back down on that bench. And then they just wait and observe the world around them, feeling that this experience is somehow transformative internally for them. Feeling this connection with this place. And then while they remain still, so this reality fades. They can see those mirrors again. The room becomes darker with just the lights from the phones illuminating, bouncing off those mirrors. And they realize that something about being in this room allowed the experience to be more real than perhaps just having the experience of listening to a spell. And that together they had that experience as a shared experience. And they turned and left this room, walked back down that secret passage, pressed that brick again as that passage closed, walked out of this room, back out to the main building. And when they reached the main building, they saw an elderly woman stood there, and they were startled for a moment before seeing her friendly smile. And she said that she'd been hanging around all this time for these twins to arrive. She said that one of the spells allowed one of them to remain alive in this location, connected to this property, for the time when the right people arrive to take the torch into the future, and that the two twins are those people, destined to carry that magic forward. And then she handed them both a small bracelet. They both put the bracelet on each. And as soon as they did, so the property started twinkling and sparkling. Lights started dancing all around them. A swirling, twinkling, sparkling cloud of light started emanating from their feet, up around them, around the woman. And as it did so, it was as if it was drawing the fog into the property, spinning that white fog, illuminated by the sparkling, twinkling light and a slight hum. And it was as if the woman who they'd just seen in front of them vanished and disappeared into that fog, vanished and disappeared into that fog, almost as if she became part of that fog as it circled around them, getting lighter and lighter, twinkling more and more, with each twinkling light illuminating the fog. And then as that fog began to clear, so they noticed something incredible. That while the fog was clearing, so there was a light on in this room. And as it continued to clear, the walls looked white and newly painted. And they noticed that this whole room looked brand new. And they walked through to the next room and the next room, and they opened doors. And it was as if this entire place had been rebuilt by that fog. And then on a work surface in the kitchen, they saw a handwritten note. Just saying, "Home, sweet home." Happy birthday. And they wondered what that meant. And then as they walked out of the property to take a look from the outside, they could see that the garden had been done up, that everything was still glowing, although it was night time. Everything around the property was glowing, as if there was light just illuminating this area. They could see that everything was being manicured, that the hedges were no longer overgrown. The garden was no longer overgrown. And as they walked around the other side of the property, they noticed the back garden, and that it looked just like the back garden they had just seen. And then back round the front again, hanging on the door, were two keys and a tag on each key, with each of their names on the tag. And a letter confirming that this was their home. And they didn't know what to make of this. And they headed back on their bikes as that property dimmed behind them, wondering how to explain all this to their parents. They cycled all the way home, noticing how the fog had lifted, and it was a clear night. On arrival home, it was getting very late. They headed into the house, thinking they'd probably have to just sneak to bed so as not to wake anyone. But as they walked in, so they saw their mum and dad stood there with tears in their eyes, saying how proud they were of them as young adults who they're going to become. And then the dad explains that he'd always known about this experience, about what was going to happen today, that he was brought up being told the stories about the future and about his role in presenting the ideas and telling stories as they grew up to encourage them to explore. And that for generations those stories have been passed down. For the time when the next set of twins are born in the family, and that it will be that set of twins that will take hold of the property that the previous set of twins in the family used to own. And he knew when they went out and said they were going to be late home, and when they went exploring after visiting the island, that they'd obviously found and worked out what they needed to work out. And the dad got out a book that outlined some of the family history, and they sat for many hours learning about those twins hundreds of years ago, about their abilities, and about how that was passed down through generations and recounted through generations until now. And that they knew that whenever they're ready, they've got a home they can move into if they're happy to continue to share that home. And they've got somewhere that's the family home. And that night, the girls went to bed. And as they lay there in bed with the moonlight shining in the window, and that curtain just blowing ever so slightly, with that window being slightly open, as that cool breeze just gently blows in across their faces, they talked about the experience, about the book, about the future, as they drifted and floated comfortably asleep. And while they slept, they knew they would wake with the most wonderful future ahead of them, with purpose, feeling a sense of security, knowing they've got the security of somewhere to live, the security of such loving and kind parents, and security in many other ways. And they drifted and floated comfortably and relaxed asleep.